A 340-pound inmate walked straight up to Mike Tyson in the prison yard and told him to get on his knees in front of everyone. What happened in the next 30 seconds left every single inmate standing in that yard completely speechless. This is the story nobody ever told about what really goes down behind those walls. If you are new here, we drop these untold prison stories every single day, so hit that subscribe button right now, and let's get into it. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the Indiana Youth Center, and the prison yard had been open for about 40 minutes. The sky was pale gray, and the yard smelled like concrete and cold air. Most of the inmates were doing what they always did, moving in small clusters near the weight equipment, or walking slow laps around the outer fence, keeping their heads down and minding their own business. That was the unspoken code in that yard. You stayed in your lane. You did not make noise. You did not draw attention. And above all else, you did not start something you could not finish. Mike Tyson had learned that code fast. He had been inside for several months by this point, and he had settled into a rhythm that kept him out of trouble. He trained every single morning before breakfast, shadow boxing in the small open space near the back of his cell block, working his footwork, working his combinations, keeping his body sharp, keeping his mind focused. He did not seek out conversation. He did not sit at the center tables in the cafeteria. He did not make eye contact with men who were looking for a reason. He was simply doing his time, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. That Tuesday afternoon, Mike was standing near the far end of the yard, working through a quiet shadowboxing session near the chain link fence. His fists moved in short, tight arcs, his feet barely lifting off the ground. His breathing was controlled, and even his eyes were focused on nothing and everything at the same time, the way a trained fighter learns to see the whole space around him without locking onto any single point. It was the kind of calm that only comes from years and years of discipline, the kind of calm that most men in that yard had never seen up close. That was when the energy in the yard shifted. It happened the way these things always happen in prison, not with a loud sound, not with an announcement, just a slow, creeping change in the air, the way a crowd of men who have been talking and moving suddenly gets very quiet and very still without anyone saying a word. Heads turned one by one. The clusters of inmates near the weight equipment stopped what they were doing. Men who had been mid-conversation let their voices trail off. Eyes moved toward the same direction, like the whole yard was holding one single breath. Marcus Webb had just come through the yard door. Marcus was not new to that facility. He had been transferred in from a higher security placement about 6 weeks earlier, and in those 6 weeks he had made absolutely sure that every single man in that prison knew exactly who he was. He stood 6 feet and 4 inches tall and carried somewhere between 330 and 340 pounds of dense, heavy muscle on a frame that seemed almost too large for the space around him. His arms were thick as most men's legs. His neck sat on his shoulders like a structural beam. His walk was slow and wide and deliberate, the kind of walk that says, I am not afraid of anything in this place, and I never have been. In those 6 weeks, Marcus had broken the previous unspoken hierarchy of that yard without a single formal confrontation. He had simply walked into spaces that belonged to other men, sat down at tables that were already claimed, stood in lines that had order, and waited for someone to say something. Nobody ever did. The men around him adjusted, the men around him moved, the men around him decided without discussion that whatever Marcus Webb wanted, Marcus Webb could have, because the alternative was something none of them wanted to think about. Except on that Tuesday afternoon, Marcus Webb did not want a table. He did not want a spot at the weights. He did not want a place in a line. He wanted Mike Tyson. Marcus walked across that yard with the kind of focus that made every inmate between him and his destination step quietly to the side without being asked. He moved in a straight line toward the far end of the fence, where Mike was still working through his shadowboxing, and he stopped about 8 feet away and stood there with his arms crossed over his massive chest, and just watched. Mike felt it before he saw it, that trained instinct that had kept him alive through the worst streets of Brownsville as a child and through hundreds of fights as a professional boxer. That instinct does not sleep, it does not take days off. He stopped mid-combination and turned slowly and looked at Marcus and said nothing. For about 10 full seconds, neither man spoke. The yard was almost completely silent. By now, every inmate who had a line of sight to that corner of the fence had stopped moving and was watching. Some had moved to better positions. Some were standing on benches. The guards in the tower had noticed the gathering and were watching from above, but had not moved yet. Then Marcus Webb uncrossed his arms and pointed one thick finger directly at the ground in front of his feet. "Get on your knees," he said. His voice was not loud. He did not need it to be loud. The yard was so quiet that every man within 50 that afternoon became the most talked about moment in that facility for the rest of the year. Inmates who had been in the far corner of the yard and had not seen it clearly asked the ones who had every version of the story that spread through the cell blocks that night carried the same central truth. Mike Tyson had been told to kneel in front of the entire yard, and the man who said those words had ended up on the ground in under 30 seconds without Mike ever raising his voice, without Mike ever showing panic, without Mike ever losing the calm that every man watching would remember for the rest of their sentence. Marcus Webb served out the remainder of his time in that facility without ever again walking in Mike Tyson's direction. He kept to himself. He kept his head down. He became one more man in orange, moving quietly through the days, which is exactly what he should have done from the very beginning. What those men witnessed that afternoon was not simply a physical confrontation. It was a lesson that no one in that yard would ever be able to unlearn. Real strength does not announce itself. It does not pace the yard looking for an audience. It does not point fingers and demand submission. It waits. And when it is finally called upon, it responds with such precision and such calm that there is nothing left to question. The men who stood in that circle watching Mike Tyson walk back through that yard door understood something in that moment that most people spend their entire lives never learning. Some things do not need to be explained, they only need to be witnessed. If this story hit different from anything you have watched today, then you already know exactly what to do. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we drop these untold prison stories every single day, and you do not want to miss a single one. Every video on this channel is built around the moments that never made the headlines, the confrontations that happened behind walls where no camera crews were ever allowed and no reporter ever got the full story. These are the moments that only the men who lived them ever knew about, and we bring them to you every single day. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think would have happened if Marcus Webb had been ready for what Mike Tyson was carrying that afternoon. We read every single comment, and the best ones shape what we cover next. So hit subscribe, turn on that bell notification so you never miss an upload, and we will see you in the next one.